Welcome to this video where we're going to deploy a Python FastAPI application to the cloud using Render, which is a simple and free cloud platform. If you've built an API that works on your local machine, then the next step is usually getting it deployed so that other people can actually use it as well. Now, there are currently quite a lot of good options out there for Python already, including AWS, Google Cloud, Railway, and many more. But if you wanted something with a free tier that is also easy to learn and use, then Render is a pretty interesting option. By the end of this video, we're going to have a cloud deployed FastAPI application with CRUD endpoints to create, read, and delete items. It's running on the cloud in Render with a managed PostgreSQL database to store the data. Here's what the dashboard will look like on the back end. The project is going to be connected to our GitHub repository. It's going to have a place for our environment variables, and Render will also take care of setting up and connecting the database for us automatically. It will also update the deployment whenever new changes are pushed to our GitHub repository for this server. All up, this whole thing should just take 5 minutes to set up. In this video, we're going to take an existing FastAPI application and deploy it to Render. I'll show you how to set up some basic configuration for it and how you can deploy it in just one click. Of course, any serious web app is also going to need a database, so we'll take a look at how to use Render's managed PostgreSQL database as well. Then finally, we'll talk about how Render compares to other deployment options you might want to consider, for example, like AWS. All of the code for this project will be available on GitHub. The link will be in the video description. All right, let's get started. Now, I'm going to assume you probably already have a web app or a Python project that you want to deploy. But for this tutorial, we're going to use a very simple Python REST API as our app. You can clone the project from GitHub, and you'll see that this is just a simple CRUD backend implemented with FastAPI. It has endpoints to create, get, and delete items, and items are basically just a string. Now, an important part for deployment is how we handle the database. Locally, the app will use a SQLite database because it's simple and it doesn't really require any setup, but for production, we want to use PostgreSQL. Now, this is up to you if you want to change it, but here is how we've set it up for now. And the way this works is that we're simply reading the database URL from an environment variable. So if it's not set, we'll just use a local SQLite database. Otherwise, we can set a PostgreSDB URL for it, which we will get from Render once we set that up, and use that as our database instead. Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and run this app locally just to make sure that everything works before we begin the deployment. I'm using UV to manage this project and its dependencies, so you will need to have UV installed first if you want to use these commands. Once you've cloned the project, you can run this to set it up and start the server locally. Once it's running, you can visit the localhost URL to see this hello world message. And then if you wanted to test the APIs themselves, just go to /docs and you should have an interactive page where you can view and test each of the APIs. Once you've made sure that everything works locally, we can now deploy it to Render. First, go to render.com to create an account. Next, make sure that you push your project to GitHub. Render works really closely with GitHub, so your project will need to be on there as well. After that, go back to Render and go to your dashboard. Now, there's two ways I know to actually do this deployment. The first way is that we can actually create a new project, a new web service, and then select the GitHub library when it prompts us to. So here you could see it there. And if you do this, you're going to have to set up everything manually. So you have to select your project, and then add all the environment variables, the build commands, the start commands, and set up your own database. And then when you click deploy, it's just going to take your code and then build it and deploy it. And it will also do a redeployment every time the branch is updated here. Now, this isn't too bad. I've actually put instructions in the README for how to do this if you wanted to set it all up manually. But if you're feeling a little bit lazy, then there's a better way to deploy this as well using something called a blueprint. So I'm just going to cancel this and go back to my dashboard. And if you go back to our project repository, you'll see that there's a file here called render.yaml. This is what's called a blueprint, or it's the Render version of infrastructure as code. With this method, we can define all of our Render infrastructure as YAML code, and we need to put it in a file called render.yaml, and it needs to be in the root directory of the project. And this will basically specify all of the service, database, and environment configuration for us in a single file. So with this method, we don't actually have to click anything in the console. If you take a moment to actually look at this code, it should mostly be pretty self-explanatory. First, we have this section of all the databases we want to create. There's just one database, here's the name, and we want to use the free tier. And for the services, we've got one service as well. It's a web service using the Python runtime, and here it's got our build command, our start command to spin up the server, as well as our environment variables. Again, we're specifying that we want to use the free plan. I also want to call out that it's able to reference other code within this file directly. So for here, normally if you defined the database URL yourself, you'd get this kind of long obfuscated URL that you'd have to copy and paste after you've created the database. In this case, we can refer to this thing directly and Render will plug that URL in for us when it's time. So once you have this file in your project and your GitHub and everything is up to date, we can go back to the Render dashboard. Now we'll go to add new, but instead of going for web service, we're going to go all the way down here to blueprint and then click that. And again, we'll get to choose a GitHub repository to connect. So we'll choose this one here. You're going to have to come up with a name for it. So I'm just going to type in FastAPI app, and then we can just click deploy blueprint. So now it's going to take a couple of minutes to create the database and then build and deploy your app. In my case, the build took 3 minutes to complete. Once it's done, you can click on the resources tab and you'll see the database and the web service. So let's click on our web service to take a look. And on the web service page, you can see the URL that you can click to view the deployed version of the app. And here it is. So here is our hello world message. And then we can go to the interactive docs to use the endpoints. We could test it out as well by creating an item ourselves. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's click try out on this API. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller, and then I'll create a new item. I'll hit execute. And it's inserted this new item into our database. So then we can go and fetch it as well to see if that works. And we can see our new item has been fetched here. And if you wanted, you can also restart the server and then run this get command again, just to make sure that the item was still there, to really show that it's now using the Postgres backend. Now, I just want to go back to the dashboard and show you a couple of other things. So if you want to see the logs for the deployment, you can go back to the events on your web service and then click on this deploy link here. And that will take you to the logs for that instance. You scroll down, you'll see the Python logs. Firstly, it's actually building the entire environment on your project based on the command you gave it. So here it's downloading all of the dependencies and all that stuff. And now it's running the command to start the app as a server on this port. By default, I think it uses port 10,000. And once that's done, it's ready and it says our app is live and running. So if you wanted to debug your app, you can check the logs here as well. There's a couple of other things here on the side as well, like logs and metrics and environment variables. Now, just as a heads up, the free tier on Render is pretty good for prototyping and testing, but it does have some serious limitations that you should know about. So one of the biggest things is the code start time. If your app hasn't been used in about 15 minutes, Render will spin it down to save resources. So the next time someone tries to access it, it can take up to a minute to start back up. This is fine for demo projects, but not great if you're building something for actual users. Now, another thing is that you're limited to one free database with 1 GB of storage. And this database will expire after 90 days. So again, this is probably good enough for prototyping, but practically unusable for any production use cases. The web service itself only gets about half a gigabyte of RAM, which is usually enough for a basic API, but you might run into issues if you're doing anything memory intensive. So basically, the free tier is good for getting something up and running, testing things out, and maybe showing a prototype to people. But if you're building something that needs to be reliable and fast, then you'll probably want to upgrade. With that said, the paid plans on Render is actually not super expensive. If you go to their pricing page, you'll see that there are these account plans that give you things like bandwidth and collaboration and projects and horizontal scaling. But what's interesting is that the compute and the databases are charged separately. So you have to kind of scroll all the way down here and then get to the compute section. And the stuff we used in this tutorial will fall under services and the Postgres option. So if you click on show pricing, you'll see that the starter plan is $7 a month. And you can also scroll down and see that the starter plan for the Postgres is also about $7 a month. The nice thing about these plans is that it's super predictable. It's kind of paid monthly. So if you're not super experienced with cloud computing, you might have heard stories of people using AWS and then getting thousands of dollars on the bills because they don't understand the scaling and the pricing. It's a bit more for advanced users. With this, at least it's more predictable and it's going to be a flat rate. So on that topic, how does render actually compare to other deployment options? Well, there's no right or wrong answer here. It just depends on whatever is best for your use case. Let's take a quick look at other comparable options and their trade-offs. First, a simple one is virtual private servers. A traditional VPS host like AWS EC2 or DigitalOcean will give you full control, but you'll be responsible for managing everything yourself. Web servers, SSL, security patches, databases, and so on. This is a good option if you know what you're doing, but it does take a little bit more effort to set up and manage. And it's probably overkill if all you want to do is just quickly deploy a Python application. Next, we have serverless functions like AWS Lambda or Google Cloud Run, which will let you pay for only what you use and will also scale automatically. This is one of my favorite options because if it's set up properly, it's very low maintenance and it's cost effective. You'd actually be able to serve millions of requests a month simply on the free tier. Now, the drawback is that they still have cold starts and they're quite challenging to set up properly. Now, if you're looking for something that's more similar to Render, then there's probably some other lightweight platforms out there as well, such as Railway or Fly.io. I haven't used them yet, so I can't give you a comparison, but my guess is that they will probably be quite a similar experience. Maybe the pricing and the features might be a little bit different. Heroku also used to be very popular for this as well. In fact, I think it used to be the go-to deployment platform for simple Python apps, but they got rid of their free tier. So that's pretty much a wrap on how to deploy a Python FastAPI application to Render. The code for this is available on GitHub and the link is in the description. I hope this was useful and I'll see you in the next one.